Hi, this is Zach with Worn&Wound, and today I'll be taking a look at the Sinn 240 ST. This is a watch that Sinn unveiled this last year at Basel, and I think it was quite a surprising watch to see and a very interesting kind of new watch for them to add to their collection. So for those familiar with the Sinn line and as well as Sinn's history, you'll recognize the case here is pulled from their 140/142 chronographs. These are iconic Sinn chronographs, very collectible for the original ones, which were made in the 80s, maybe up through the 90s, powered by the Lemani 5100 movements, and now they have new models with their own in-house kind of version of that movement. Yeah, like I said, very collectible, very desirable, very cool watches. And one of the great things about them is they have, they hold a slight place in history in that the 140 for a time was considered to be the first automatic chronograph worn in space. It was worn on a Space Lab mission in the 80s. That later people became aware that the Seiko 6139 was actually worn by Colonel Pogue, but that's kind of a different story. Nevertheless, it was an official thing, and it was very cool, and that just gives those watches, as with every other watch that's been to space, some kind of mystique to it. And it has this really great case design, this barrel case. It's very robust, very kind of interesting design, definitely of the period of the kind of late 20th century. So this watch, the 240 ST, is, draws from that, but it's a time-only watch, and it's a kind of one of Sinn's more entry-level pieces, being that it's time-only and it's not really fit with many, or really any of their, technologies that we've talked about before, such as tetramenting or AR dehumidifying. It doesn't have any of that. It's just a straightforward sports watch. It does have a rotating internal bezel, however, which is, one slight perk. And then there's just interesting design, very late 20th century military look and feel. In the last couple of years, they've added these watches to the kind of build up Sinn's own entry-level offerings. Previously, they had the 556s, which are great, and then they added the 104, and now the 240 is kind of the newest in that sub-2000 time-only genre that they're kind of building out. So this watch comes in two different versions, on the bracelet, which you see here for $1730, as well as on a leather strap, which we'll show you later, and those are available through watchbuys.com in the US. And let's just take a closer look now. The case of the Sinn 240 ST, has this very distinct barrel shape that gives it a very kind of mid-20th century look and feel to it, which I find very appealing, to be honest. I mean, I really like barrel-shaped cases. And what's interesting about this one, though, is that it has a very, despite being a genre, the barrel case, it has a very distinct geometry to it that, to my knowledge, is really only used by Sinn. I mean, distinctly these long bevels here, the way is very broad here and cuts in, and the very short lugs, like those all are just, what you'll see on the Sinn 140 and 142s, but you don't see them elsewhere. This doesn't feel like, a stock case that they use or anything like that. So the dimensions of this case are actually 43 in diameter, making it fairly wide, but only about 46 lug to lug, so it's short. I mean, 43 by 46 is nearly a square, and it wears interestingly because of that. So it has a nice broad dial, and it is a wide watch, but it's not a very big watch, I think, in some other ways. So it wears cool, which we'll look at on the wrist. Looking at the height of it, this is actually really nice. So it's only 11 millimeters tall. And, it does have an automatic movement, and obviously the chronographs, if you saw them, they're quite a lot thicker just because of the size of the chronograph movement. And 11 is actually just fairly svelte for, an automatic anyway. I mean, I feel like you often see 12 to 14 for kind of on these sportier watches. This one also having 100-meter water resistance as part of it, too. So I really like how thin it is. Thin and wide is kind of, how I describe this watch in terms of the look and feel. But then, the geometry on it really is beautiful. I can't, quite overstate that, enough. I mean, so it's a bead blasted case, very, very smooth, perfect bead blasting, which gives it this beautiful satin sheen. And then you just see these great lines on here, this great geometry. So, you have this top surface, and that isn't flat. Here it kind of cants up and around, so the whole thing kind of curves up towards the crystal. And then these beautiful large sloping bevels here, which do a lot to kind of create, take away from the sides a bit, once again adding to the thinness of the feel of the watch. So, it's just a gorgeous curve. And then you look at the side of the watch and you see how, it's kind of an oblong shape because the whole thing is curving there and it's arcing. And then you have another bevel underneath. So there's just, it looks simple, but in reality, there's very complicated geometry here that just makes it a really, attractive watch. Now looking at the crowns at 2 and 4, you have these fairly sizable crowns. The crown at 2 turns the internal bezel. It is a non-ratcheting and bi-directional bezel, so it has a pretty smooth turn. There's a little bit of a feel to it, like you can feel the gears meshing together rather than like a perfectly smooth. Nor is it the kind, I actually, when you have these bidirectional internal bezels, I kind of like them when they kind of jump into place, but this isn't like that. It's just a rotating freely bezel mechanism. One thing that I would comment about this that I don't like or would like to have seen differently is that I feel like it should screw down, to be honest. Right now it is fairly easy to turn. And though, it's not like in a part when it's on your wrist where it's necessarily going to get bumped into, it is, light enough that a little bit will turn it a tiny bit, a little graze. So I feel like, you should be able to set your time, push it in, and lock it down. That I would really like. Similarly, the time crown isn't screwed down either. But it does have 100-meter water resistance. Screwing, down a crown is really more protection from stopping you from pulling out the crown while you're submersed or going, something like that. So that's really to help you but the actual water resistance is really more related to, the quality of the seals and things like that. So, 100-meter water resistance, this isn't a dive watch. This is definitely one of Sinn's pilot watches anyway. It's also low pressure resistance. So, not to be confused with one of their dive watches, because they do exceptionally high water resistance dive watches. But yeah, they're very easy to grasp. I do like the positioning of them. Gives it that dual crown feel, a little bit of a super compressor feel, if you will, though it's, technically not a super compressor. It just has that look. I like the crown design itself, really big teeth, really easy to grasp, nice ball end there, and then little S's on there for Sinn, obviously. So they're just a nice look, aesthetically it's all very congruent. Flipping the watch over, just open up the clasp here for a second. See the case back is just a solid steel case back, no fuss whatsoever there. Very Sinn in that way. And it's, sometimes they do display case backs here, they did not. And there's, listed with their, in German, various things. So it does say anti-magnetic here. I don't believe the movement is in a Faraday cage so much as it just has like a general magnetic resistance. The dial of the Sinn 240 ST kind of draws from various Sinn sources, so it does definitely have a resemblance to the 140, 142, but without the subdials for the chronograph, and it looks like various other older models that they had. The 157 in particular had a very similar handset and numerals and markers, and it all kind of has this similar 70s, 80s military, German military feel. You'll see these kinds of markers on various watches, Hoyers too, that were specifically military designed. And it's a nice look. It's a look I particularly really like. This whole watch, with the case and everything, it really feels like a watch that could have been, made in the 80s and it was a re-edition now, or is just a new old stock watch. But, the reality is this is the first time they've made it, but they just stayed true to that kind of core Sinn German military aesthetic. So the primary index here, as I said, is these large loomed rectangles. There's this nice kind of pale green loom, glows nice and brightly. Nothing fussy there. Outside of that, you have a minute and sub-second marker index there. So that kind of creates a nice border to the inner dial, because obviously you have the outer inner bezel there, and it just creates like a barrier between the two. And then you have on the inside of each of these markers, you have another essentially numeral marker, and then this is minutes or seconds, so it's 60, 5, 10, etc. This is the one part that I may have a little bit of an issue with, and it's twofold. One is that I feel like those numbers are just too close to those indices, especially when you look at the 3 on that 35 there, or the 5 on the 25, where they come near those points. They're really close. It feels a little crowded. I feel like there's enough space here on this dial that everything could have been brought in just a tiny bit, just to make a gap. And then the other issue I have is just redundancy. So when the internal bezel is set, in its normal position as it is right now, you obviously have that minute or second index around the dial, and then it's just repeated inside there. So I wonder if maybe that could have been a 13-24 dial, or maybe the inner bezel could have been a a Zulu bezel, so have a second time zone ring on there, so it would actually be the hours. Just something to make them a little different, or maybe that's another option, another version that they would have of the watch. Sometimes you'll see that where the watch, these military types of watches will have two different bezel options. Just something, and that was, it's kind of a minor gripe. It doesn't actually affect the function of the watch, but it did kind of, as I was staring at this, I still, as I was thinking about that. Now looking at the internal bezel, so as said, it is kind of a, it's this pilot's bezel. It has 5 through 55 in classic, configuration. It's not a countdown bezel or anything like that. It's, like I said, it's a little bit redundant, but I do like the style and look of it quite a lot. So you have a large loomed triangle there at 60, nice big numerals going around. They're very crisp and very clear. They each have these little squares underneath, and then there's dashes between them for, the individual minutes there. And it's just, it's a nice, like, loud, like kind of a bold look to it that kind of finishes off the dial nicely. Looking at the hands now, you have these great sword hands. Once again, very classic Sinn military look. In fact, I'll just quickly show you here. This is a watch that I own. This is an older Sinn. These were originally made in the 80s and through kind of the late 90s. You'll see it has the exact same handset there and same use of orange. So this is kind of a classic Sinn look to it. What I really like is how this minute hand turns into a bit of like a long pointed syringe there. That's just a detail I love of these hands. And just in general, you don't always see that. They often will, like on other companies, they would have ended before that little syringe point. So just something I quite like. The second hand then is straight, this tapering hand with bright day glow and orange on that. Once again, a great detail, very sporty, perfect use of color on this dial, being the only use of color. And it's this really saturated orange, just like, the look here, it has this nice, this is just a really cool style to it. The only other detail worth really mentioning then is obviously at 3 o'clock there's a day-date window. So interestingly enough, the original 140s, 142s, which had the Lemania 5100 movement in them, had a day-date on them too. So that is staying true once again to kind of the heritage of this watch, if you will. Not everyone likes the day date. Here it does not bother me, really. The one thing, there's a little bit of crowding. Like I feel like, once again, that window might have been a hair larger. You'll see that the words here, Sinn, and the number 6, that there's almost like a shadow on top of them. Obviously that depends on the angle and the light, but I just do feel like I see that a little bit more often on this. But as far as the placement goes, it's totally nice. I like the arrangement, the little white area around it, as well as the fact that it's a white text on a black subdial. Makes it match. Just fit in very well with the dial overall. On the wrist, the Sinn 240 ST wears very well. Like I said before, it's a 43 millimeter width with a 46 millimeter lug to lug, so it wears in a very square way, but obviously because it's a barrel, you don't have the edges there, so it's actually, I'd say, more comfortable than a square watch this size would be. But so it's wide, it has a lot of presence, but it doesn't feel huge at all. And I think it's a very comfortable watch to wear. I think it's actually a watch, if you were like a small watch person but wanted to try, test the waters with something larger, this could be a really good way to go because it's a very wearable 43 millimeter. And then in terms of the look, I think it's just a fantastic looking watch. Like I said, mid to late 20th century kind of military design here. It's very to the point. It's really not fussy. It's not really aestheticized, at least on the dial. It's very legibility focused. There's no texturing or anything really. It's just just numerals and these great colors of the matte gray and that pale green with the orange dash there. Just very classic look to it. One I find, personally very appealing, especially, for a tool watch kind of a thing. And then the case here, just beautiful case geometry. Like I said, it's not really like any other watch that you're going to come across. Really nice, robust angles here, but beautiful curves as well. So it's just a very attractive, and it's neither simple nor complex. It's just this very interesting, elegant form, but it's still a nice, tough tool watch look to it. So now obviously we have it on the bracelet here. And one thing I'll say immediately about the bracelet, so you might notice that these end links, they don't flex down. So in terms of size and wearability, the end links make the watch wear larger than a leather strap would. So you might actually, like I prefer it on the leather strap, which I'll show you in a minute, but this does give it a very complete look, so definitely wanted you to see that. So what's interesting about these end links and the strapless bracelet too is it's an extremely tapering bracelet. Now, Sinn's bracelets are all very nice, beautifully made bracelets. They're this classic H-link look. This is very true to Sinn. And you'll see that tapers, so here you have this cutout. The lugs are 22 millimeters, but then the bracelet flares out to 26 millimeters here, and then comes all the way down to 18. So it's a really nice dramatic taper there that I think makes the watch wear a little bit more comfortably than certainly a 26 millimeter bracelet would. But also, takes these flowing shapes from the case and pulls them down the bracelet. So I like that a lot too. You'll notice this isn't quite sized for my wrist actually. So the one thing that's a little bit interesting, the sizing mechanism on here, so it is screw bars, but they're with little hex keys, so I didn't actually have the right tool for that, but rather than a push through, but it is a nice, it is very secure, so, and it shouldn't be too hard to size yourself. The Sinn clasp here, very basic, simple clasp. To be honest, I think that this is something that they could make a little bit fancier. I think that this looks a little bit stock to me, whereas the bracelet itself is so beautiful. This could be upped. I mean, it's totally functional, totally works, but I just would like to see something a little bit newer, a little bit more robust, maybe something with some expandability in it. So now we'll take a look at the leather strap. On the leather strap, the watch wears, for me, a lot better even, because like I said, you don't have that issue with the end links kind of coming off, and you just really get a sense of the true size of this case. So this is very comfortable, and I wore this watch quite a bit over the last couple of weeks, and I found it very comfortable, very easy to wear throughout the day. I love the thin profile of it. It just wears it's a very sleek watch, yet it has this really nice presence, but I think it's, on my wrist, 7-inch wrist here, it doesn't look too big at all to me. It is wide, but even with the crowns being split like that, you don't have the issue of a crown digging in there. So just very comfortable, very cool, sporty design. And so now this is the leather strap option. This is definitely a D Model Cronismo, but like a Sinn branded one. The D Model Cronismo is like amongst my favorite straps available. They're so overbuilt, they're so tough. I mean, the amount of detailing that goes into these things is absolutely outrageous. And they work perfectly with this kind of watch and this kind of case. So they flare out a little bit wider than the lugs as well, and then taper in just like the bracelet does. But you have this really great like overlapping area here for the at the lug, so it's almost like two straps in one, sort of. It almost touches on looking a bit like a Bund strap, like a Bundeswehr strap, which would have the pad behind it, which is once again appropriate for a German military watch, obviously. And then with the black, I actually think that this picks up the dial a lot more and kind of brings the dial out. You see this, black, steel black, so that just makes it pop a bit, and then the threading, brings out the indices and text a little bit on the dial. So I just think it's a really, really great match here. And then, you have the nice little Sinn, super matte Sinn thumbnail buckle there too, just to finish it all off. To wrap up, the Sinn 240 ST, I think it's a very cool new offering from Sinn. It's nice to see them messing around a little bit with this case design to kind of make it perhaps a little bit more popular, a little bit more available, generally speaking. And I think putting it into a three-hand watch was a kind of a bold move in those regards. So currently there are Sinn 140s that they make, and those use an in-house modified chronograph, and I believe they're over $4,000, so they're just less accessible. But rather than put a 7750 in it or something like that, and maybe place it around 2,500, I'm just throwing numbers out there. They went for this three-hand model powered by the Sellita SW 2200 or 220 movement, which is just a very kind of normal day date movement. They only use high grade ones though, of course. They made it more accessible, and it works. It works. This design works as a three-hand watch. On the leather, I think it really is this cool, streamlined, very 80s feeling kind of military tool watch, and it's just great. Like I said, I feel like this watch could have existed 30 years ago. It could have been a vintage watch, a vintage Sinn, but it is a new design that just really stays true to Sinn's kind of core aesthetic. Now, in terms of pricing, I think for $1,560 with the strap, $1,730 with the bracelet, it is kind of competitive within their own range. It is a few $100s more than, say, the 556s. So, the question is it worth it to you? And I think it really comes down to the style and things like that. The internal bezel is a very cool function, but it's not necessarily one you need per se. But I do like the look of it, of course. For me, I think like that one thing I was talking about before, if they had maybe a Zulu bezel in there, or just something to add a little bit more function that I would use on like a day-to-day basis, I would like it all the more. But yeah, otherwise just, it's a great watch. I'm excited to see what they do with the 240 line. If they ever made one of these with a tegimented case, that'd be great as well, giving you more of a kind of a rugged feel to it. And yeah, so please read the full review on Worn&Wound. Thank you. Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook.